So imagine you were standing inside this really massive building, and suddenly you feel the floor actually shake beneath you.
Like a real physical tremor.
Right, exactly. You listen closely, and you can hear the concrete groaning. You literally see these, hairline fractures spiderwebbing up the load-bearing pillars.
Which is terrifying.
It is, because in structural engineering, there is this fundamental concept known as load-bearing capacity. You calculate with absolute mathematical precision exactly how much physical stress a framework can withstand before you deliberately introduce even a single ounce of new weight.
Right. You have to ensure the foundation is fully settled before you even think about building the upper floors.
Exactly. You would never, under any circumstances, attempt to construct a skyscraper while the ground beneath it is, actively tearing itself apart.
It would be an engineered catastrophe. I mean,
Yeah.
you would be basically guaranteeing a collapse.
And yet when we pivot to human developmental science, specifically the sociological and biological data surrounding young men, that careful structural logic just completely disintegrates.
It really does.
We are routinely introducing maximum external stress at the exact moment their internal foundation is undergoing its most volatile, unpredictable, seismic shift. Welcome back to this deep dive, everyone. This is episode 2 of our 5-part series, The Crisis of Modern Boys.
And for those of you joining us, we need to be clear about the tone of today's briefing. It is strictly analytical.
Right, no casual banter today.
Mm.
We are focusing exclusively on the hard data and the developmental science provided in our sources.
Because honestly, that is the only way to accurately interpret this data. The research isolates a highly specific, profoundly volatile window of human development.
We're talking about early to middle adolescence, right?
Yes, specifically ages 12 to 15, which, corresponds roughly to grades 7 through 9. Developmental psychologists, pediatric specialists, sociological researchers, they all unequivocally identify this specific 3-year span as the apex of adversity for American boys.
The apex of adversity. That right there is our mission for today's briefing, for you, the listener. We need to identify exactly why this highly specific window is the most profoundly challenging period for the boys themselves, for their parents, and for their educators.
And we're going to examine this by looking at 3 distinct layers of data.
The biological metamorphosis, the severe neurological mismatch that accompanies it, and the punishing ecological transition into middle school.
Because together, these elements create a perfect storm of friction.
So let's just start right at the very base layer. What exactly is happening physiologically when a boy crosses the threshold into this 12 to 15 age bracket?
Well, the defining characteristic here is the sheer velocity of the biological disruption. I mean, when we talk about the onset of puberty in boys, we are not talking about a gradual, gentle slope of hormonal changes.
Right, it's not a slow ramp up.
Not at all. We are talking about a massive, almost violent influx of testosterone. And this hormonal surge is the engine driving rapid physical growth, drastically heightened competitiveness, profound mood shifts.
And those extreme, unpredictable fluctuations in energy levels, right?
Exactly. But the testosterone dump is really only one half of the biological engine. We also have to examine what is happening with dopamine,
which is the brain's primary reward chemical. It's, what makes us feel good when we accomplish a task, eat something delicious, or win a game.
Right. And here is where the mechanics get truly fascinating. During this early adolescent window, the brain's dopamine receptors essentially recalibrate.
Recalibrate how?
They become less sensitive. Because of this, a boy in this 12 to 15 bracket becomes highly motivated to seek out intense dopamine-inducing activities just to feel a normal baseline sense of reward.
Oh, wow. So activities that used to satisfy them, like, playing a simple game in the yard or reading a book, those no longer register as rewarding.
Precisely. The brains are actively demanding much higher levels of stimulation just to feel okay.
So they are aggressively hunting for a dopamine release. What does that hunt actually look like in the real world for, say, a 13-year-old?
Well, it manifests as a marked, measurable increase in highly impulsive, risk-taking, and thrill-seeking behaviors. The biological imperative at this stage is to push boundaries.
So leaping off a roof into a pool, instigating a confrontation, engaging in reckless physical stunts.
Exactly. And the key takeaway here is they are not doing this merely to be difficult. Their physiological system is actively driving them to seek out high-stakes situations.
Because that is the only way their recalibrated receptors can capture enough dopamine to feel satisfied.
You nailed it.
It's like taking a standard car and upgrading it with a high-performance race car engine overnight. But and this is the crucial part, without upgrading any of the vehicle's handling systems.
That is the perfect analogy.
So we have this biological system that is actively demanding risk and extreme stimulation. The immediate question becomes, how is the brain managing that risk? If biology is this surging high-performance engine, what is happening with the brain's brakes?
And this is where the data reveals a terrifying neurological mismatch. At the exact same time this biological engine is revving at maximum capacity, the neurological brakes are fundamentally compromised.
And in this context, the brakes are the prefrontal cortex, right?
Yes. That is the region of the human brain situated right behind the forehead, and it is entirely responsible for executive functioning. It governs logical reasoning, the ability to foresee long-term consequences, organization, and crucially, impulse control.
But the data makes it very clear that during the 12 to 15 age window, the prefrontal cortex remains highly underdeveloped.
Highly underdeveloped and significantly lagging. This is where comparative data between genders becomes utterly vital for educators and parents to understand. The male prefrontal cortex typically reaches maturation up to 2 full years later than it does in females.
2 full years. I mean, that is a massive developmental chasm when you consider these students are sitting right next to each other in the exact same 7th grade classroom.
It is a profound disparity, and it happens largely because girls generally enter the biological phase of puberty earlier than boys, which kickstarts their neurological maturation sooner.
So you have an internal environment in adolescent boys where intense emotional reactions and powerful physical urges are completely ungoverned by mature self-regulation.
Exactly. They literally lack the neurological hardware at this stage to accurately anticipate the long-term consequences of their actions. They cannot hit the brakes because the brake lines haven't even been fully installed yet.
To help visualize this disconnect for the listener, it's not just a race car with no brakes. Think of it like a massive corporation undergoing a volatile billion-dollar merger.
I like this.
Right. There is chaos, money moving everywhere, entire departments being restructured overnight. That's the biological surge of puberty. But right in the middle of this catastrophic transition, the entire human resources department and legal compliance team just go on a 2-year strike.
That's the prefrontal cortex.
Yes, the company is moving at light speed, but there is absolutely zero internal regulation to stop a disastrous decision from being made.
That captures the structural vulnerability perfectly, but the prefrontal cortex delay is really only one half of the neurological equation. The behavioral science data points to another phenomenon during this window.
Okay.
And frankly, this is the finding that parents and educators struggle with the most. During early puberty, there is a temporary yet severe decline in empathy among boys.
Wait, I really want to stop and underline this for the listener. The data shows that a boy's capacity for empathy doesn't just stall, it actually goes backward.
It does. It is a measurable regression. But to understand how and why this happens, we have to distinguish between 2 types of empathy.
Okay, let's break those down.
First, there is cognitive empathy, which is the logical ability to understand how another person feels. For example, recognizing that if someone is crying, they are sad.
Right, it's an intellectual understanding.
Exactly. Then there is affective empathy, which is the emotional ability to actually feel what another person is feeling, to internalize their distress as your own.
So while adolescent girls generally follow a steady upward trajectory in both forms of empathy during this age, the data shows boys frequently experience a sharp regression, particularly in affective empathy.
Yes, it drops, and it typically does not begin to rebound until they reach about age 16.
What does this regression look like in practice, though? What does it mean for a 13 or 14-year-old boy to experience this drop at the dinner table or in the classroom?
Well, developmental experts describe it as a fierce internal battle between empathy and entitlement. Because the biological noise of puberty is so deafening, the testosterone, the dopamine hunt.
And the prefrontal cortex is struggling just to keep the lights on.
Right. So the boy's internal focus narrows drastically inward. It is a survival mechanism. He only has the bandwidth to manage his own internal chaos. In practice, this manifests as striking egocentrism.
He acts with an apparent, almost baffling disregard for the feelings of the people around him.
Yes. Parents often feel like their previously sweet, affectionate son has been replaced by a callous stranger. But the data tells us they aren't necessarily acting out of malice.
They literally lack the neurological bandwidth at that specific moment in development to prioritize the emotional states of their parents, peers, or teachers.
Exactly. The empathy center has been temporarily powered down so the brain can direct energy toward managing the biological upheaval.
Which, understandably, exacerbates intense familial and academic conflicts.
Because the adults expect a level of emotional reciprocity that the boy is temporarily incapable of providing.
So let's synthesize the reality of this briefing so far.
Mm,
We have a biological engine running completely wild on a flood of testosterone and a desperate hunt for dopamine.
right.
We have neurological breaks that are functionally delayed by 2 full years compared to their female peers. And we have a measurable regression in empathetic capacity that breeds a startling level of egocentrism.
That is the internal reality.
The crucial question then becomes, what happens when society takes a boy in this exact, highly vulnerable physiological state and drops him into a completely new, high-stakes environment?
And that is exactly what we do. This is where we shift our analysis from internal biology to external sociology. Sociologists utilize a concept called role strain, which is closely tied to the loss of what they call stage environment fit.
Let's break those concepts down for the listener. What exactly is a stage environment fit?
The fundamental principle of stage environment fit is that human beings thrive when their social and physical environments fulfill their specific developmental needs at that exact stage of life.
Makes sense.
If the environment demands skills you possess, you succeed. If the environment demands skills you lack, you experience role strain, which is a profound psychological stress caused by the inability to meet the expectations of your role.
And for boys aged 12 to 15, the transition into the American middle school system represents a massive, almost catastrophic loss of stage environment fit.
Let's ground this in reality by contrasting the environments. Look at the typical elementary school model, say 5th grade. It offers a very high level of teacher support. The environment is warm and nurturing.
You have a singular classroom structure. The student remains in one physical place with one primary teacher who knows their personality, their moods, and their learning style.
Right. And the pedagogical focus is heavily weighted toward intrinsic learning, learning for the sake of discovery and curiosity. It is an environment that acts as a secure base.
Now look at what happens virtually overnight. They transition into middle school for 6th or 7th grade.
The data characterizes middle schools by increased high-stakes academic competition. The behavioral expectations become intensely rigid.
And the intimacy between teacher and student is just obliterated because students are suddenly rotating through 6 or 7 different classrooms a day. They're just a face in a crowd of hundreds.
Exactly. The educational emphasis pivots sharply away from intrinsic mastery and suddenly prioritizes cold, quantifiable performance. A through F grading scales, standardized testing, and comparative metrics.
So the system is demanding maximum organizational and emotional control precisely when the boy's biology has just stripped him of it. I mean, think about the logistics of being a 7th grader.
It's overwhelming.
You have to navigate a crowded hallway in 3 minutes. You have to remember a locker combination. You have to manage 6 different syllabi, remember homework for 6 different subjects, and regulate your behavior across 6 different authority figures, all of whom have different rules.
Which requires peak executive functioning. It requires the prefrontal cortex to be firing on all cylinders to organize, prioritize, and regulate impulses.
The exact neurological hardware we just established is 2 years delayed.
Exactly. The impact of this mismatch is clearly quantified in the data. Studies on role strain indicate that higher amounts of middle school transition stress directly predict lower grades, higher school anxiety, and significantly lower school bonding.
Furthermore, the sociological data shows that boys exhibit a massive decline in their ability to cope during this specific transition compared to girls.
Yes. When faced with this loss of stage environment fit, boys don't just struggle. Their coping mechanisms frequently collapse. They simply do not have the internal architecture ready to handle the external logistical demands being placed upon them.
Which isolates them. In this high-stress, deeply rigid environment where parents feel increasingly distant and frustrated, and teachers are largely transactional figures grading their performance every 45 minutes, who do these boys turn to?
That is the critical vulnerability.
Who validates them when the adults in the room are essentially speaking in organizational language their developing brains cannot yet fluently translate?
And that sociological vacuum is immediately filled by their peers. When institutional and parental support structures feel alienated from the boy's reality, peer influence becomes the ultimate authority.
Right.
Sociological data tracks human susceptibility to peer pressure across a lifespan, and the resulting graph forms a very distinct inverted U-shaped curve.
And where does that curve peak?
The curve begins to rise sharply in early adolescence. As boys enter the 12 to 15 window, their reliance on peers accelerates aggressively. It peaks with mathematical precision right around age 14.
Age 14.
Yes. After age 14, it begins a gradual decline as the adolescent moves toward late adolescence and early adulthood.
Let's focus on that peak.
Yeah.
At age 14, when peer susceptibility is at its absolute maximum, what does that look like behaviorally?
Well, at age 14, boys are extraordinarily vulnerable to conforming to group norms. We have to remember the biological state we just outlined. A massive drive for dopamine combined with deeply underdeveloped impulse control.
When you combine that biology with the social vacuum of middle school, the immediate reward of peer validation becomes overwhelmingly powerful. It is practically a narcotic.
Absolutely. The source material specifically cites how this extreme vulnerability heavily correlates with a spike in antisocial behaviors.
What kind of behaviors are we talking about here?
We see distinct statistical spikes in actions like cheating on exams, general delinquency, trespassing, vandalism, and the overt defiance of authority. The currency of this age group is often rebellion.
Because rebellion demonstrates independence and fearlessness to the peer group. It secures their social standing, even if it is completely illogical and self-destructive from the perspective of an adult observer.
It is entirely about social survival. The intense desire for peer validation entirely outstrips the influence of parental authority during this 12 to 15 window.
This is why parents frequently report the heartbreaking reality that their middle schoolers practically ignore them.
Yes. The boy's psychological survival feels intrinsically linked to his standing with his same-age peers. The opinions of adults are minimized because adults do not hold the social currency the boy feels he desperately needs to survive the hostile ecosystem of middle school.
But there is a vital piece of data that acts as a control group for this entire phenomenon. The sources point to a distinct settlement period in late adolescence. The turbulence does not last forever.
No, it does not. As boys move into the 16 to 18 age bracket, the developmental data shows the internal and external turbulence beginning to settle.
Why does it settle?
Because the biology and the neurology finally begin to align. The prefrontal cortex matures to a functional degree which enables logical, forward-thinking decision-making. They can finally see the long-term consequences of a foolish risk.
Now, what about that severe drop in empathy we discussed earlier? Does that come back?
It begins to recover. The effective empathy resumes an upward trajectory. The boy regains the bandwidth to care about how his parents and peers feel.
So the egocentrism fades.
Yes. Most importantly, as this neurological hardware comes online, a stronger, more independent sense of identity begins to form. This internal confidence helps older teens naturally resist the peer pressure that completely dictated their behavior just 2 years prior.
And that settlement phase essentially proves the central thesis of our briefing today for you, the listener. The 12 to 15 window is a uniquely volatile biological anomaly.
Uniquely volatile.
Yes, late adolescence brings higher systemic stakes, the physical risks associated with driving, the crushing pressure of college admissions, or the transition into the workforce. But the fundamental daily psychological and biological volatility is most acute and most dangerous between the ages of 12 and 15.
If we synthesize this entire briefing, we are looking at a compounding chain of events that guarantee failure if not properly managed. You have a dopamine-fueled testosterone surge creating an engine of impulsivity.
You have a delayed prefrontal cortex that cannot apply the brakes.
You have a measurable drop in effective empathy that breeds a survival-based egocentrism. You take that highly volatile physiological profile and you force it into the rigid, performance-obsessed, highly transactional environment of middle school.
And finally, you isolate the boy from adult guidance by introducing peak susceptibility to peer pressure at age 14.
It is, by every developmental metric we possess, the perfect storm.
It is the absolute definition of a developmental crucible. We have taken the structural engineering metaphor from the beginning of our deep dive and watched the system intentionally stress a fractured foundation. But here is the critical mandate for you to understand as we conclude today's briefing. The biological and ecological mismatches we have detailed today are only the beginning.
That must be stated with absolute clarity. The biological metamorphosis, the neurological delays, and the transition into middle school. These are simply the foundational conditions. They create the profound vulnerability, but they are not the ultimate crisis itself.
They merely set the stage for what happens next. Join us in episode 3, where we will uncover the devastating reality of the crisis of connection.